Hello, we welcome you to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast, once again with your hosts Bernhard and my wife Laura Matsu. And the title of this episode is How to Actualize Your Creative Potential. Now, this is a big one, very, very important for the times we're in right now. We really need to tap into our creative potential and really, as part of creating the new world, our new lives. And many of us, have gone through some hardships and have to let go of the past, of the old world. So it's about really activating our creative potential in this day and age. It's key. So some of the topics we're getting into is really about the importance to activate our creative potential and why it is needed now more than ever. We'll look also into evil, the role of evil, and how evil is really not capable of creating anything new. It actually lacks creativity. We'll be diving deeper into the interrelationship between inspiration and creativity, and also shadow work, how shadow work is necessary to unleash our creative potential. We'll look also at the bigger picture and how creativity ties into the age of Aquarius and Pluto in Aquarius, as well as the link between creativity, opulence, and abundance. And as we dive deeper, we also look into the interrelationship between sexual energy and creative energy and how the matrix forces have cut us off from our creative energy via the distortion of sexual energy, of feeding of the sexual luge of humanity. And we also will be giving practical tips of what you can do right now to activate your creative flow. And before we dive into this episode, just a little announcement. Some of you, or I hope many of you, have received my newsletters, where you can subscribe to at veilofreality.com. And we announced a free masterclass on embodied shadow work, which will be happening this Monday, the 11th. However, the class is already full. It filled up literally in record time within 1 hour after I sent out the newsletter for people to sign up and register. That was already last week. So if you want to also stay updated, go sign up to my newsletter on my website, veilofreality.com. Having said that, we still have some spots left in our intensive 12-week in-depth group coaching program, Time of Transition Embodied Soul Awakening, which will be starting July 25th for 3 months until October 15th. And that's a very, very deep dive combining the necessary inner and outer work in light of the fourfold approach of holistic self-work, really combining in-depth psychological, somatic, and spiritual work to also help you activate your creative potential. And really, we dive much, much deeper in very practical ways in many of the topics we have talked about here in our podcast. So you can find more about it and apply at thattimeoftransition.com. Again, that's thattimeoftransition.com. Now, without any further ado, let's dive deeper into how to actualize your creative potential.
Okay, so why is this so important right now? Well, what we're dealing with right now is Pluto is in the late degrees of Capricorn. Everything's super dark, super corrupt. No one trusts the institutions anymore. You see all the Saturn structures of reality, the medical system, the mainstream medical system, the education system, even the government, everyone's losing faith in all those structures because of the amount of corruption that we're seeing. So we're going to be in for a big generational shift. Even now, actually, because we're in the late degrees of Capricorn, but Pluto is going to enter Aquarius, a new sign, which will be a 20-year cycle. And this is going to start from March to June 2023. And then unfortunately, it's going to go retrograde back into Capricorn for the rest of the year. But then January 21st, isn't that your birthday, by the way?
January 27th, my love.
Okay, sorry. Okay, January 21st, it's going to set up shop in Aquarius for 20 years, basically. So the reason, and you're like, what does Aquarius have to do with creativity? Well, you don't actually just consider Aquarius as part of the themes of the generation. It also includes a polarity point of Leo. So Aquarius is about individuation, and Leo is about creative self-actualization. And they go hand in hand, actually, because the more individuated you are, the more creative energy that you have access to. So just think about it as we're going to be working with both the Aquarius and Leo archetypes in collective ways, obviously. It's going to hit everyone differently. If you have certain planets and certain signs getting aspected by Aquarius or even in Leo, it will affect you differently. I'm not going to go into that because it'd be impossible to, but just to know, your individuation and your creative self-actualization are going to come to the forefront at the beginning of 2023. And the reason we're talking about it right now is because basically we need to set the seeds of the next era that we're ending into. We have a tremendous opportunity right now. But if we don't plant the seeds now, or even like a year ago, or just at least start now, then what's going to happen is we're not going to have any new thing to step into. And personally, like, the technocracy will probably give us all the solutions of the AI, all sorts of other forms of, disassociative technology, get us more and more out of body. So we really need to be the creators of this next world that we're stepping into. There's an amazing opportunity right now. When people lose trust in the current structures, it creates an opportunity for something new to emerge. And this will happen across the board in many different industries. So we really want to think about, like, how can we turn up the volume on our creative energy? Because when we speak also about divine will, is your creative energy is the clearest channel of divine will as well. You have this creative spark in you, whether it's even small or it's very strong, but we all have it. And the more we can access our creative energy, the more that we also become conscious transducers of divine will ourselves.
Exactly. Very well said. And it also relates to the famous Buckminster Fuller quote, which says, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." So we're going through this death rebirth process. The old structures, institutions are not working anymore. It's not about saving them anymore. And I say this again, it's not about building back better, as we know the globalists use, Biden and all of that. But it's also not, I would even also challenge, it's not about MAGA, not about making America great again, going to the past and all of this. And yes, there's something to be said about upholding traditional values, but there's a lot of nostalgia wanting to go to the past of how we think things were. No, it's a complete quantum leap, and we need to engage our creative potential. It's not about fighting the existing structure or trying to save the system or all of that. Now, many people, maybe including you, are struggling. Maybe some of you have lost a job because of the jab mandates and not wanting to get it and all of that, many other things. And or the schooling system, educational system, taking your kids out of the schools and not wanting to be in a public educational system. And many people then try to still, change the public systems or trying to go back to the employees and whatnot. No, let it go. This is, like Laura said, this is an opportunity to create something new. And I'm not going to say it's easy, but we need to engage our creative potential. And it takes a lot of energy. It takes will. It takes risks. It takes courage. And it also takes self-responsibility. Because many of us, we've been like, especially we have a general job or whatever, we're getting so used to the comfort of like the paycheck and whatnot. But there's a lot of opportunity right now, ironically, even with this whole recession, whatnot, for entrepreneurship, for something new to seed, for something new to create. But we need to also get over this doom and gloom fear frequency of what might happen and the great reset and all of that. There's an opportunity right now, and it requires to unleash our creative potential.
Yeah. And the reason, if you're in this kind of doom and gloom fear mindset, you're actually probably not accessing your creative potential because you'll be in a shutdown trauma survival state, basically. And so, it is important we actually do our own self-healing before. It's not like you're just going to go from being extremely disassociated and traumatized to being creative. Although I have to say, at moments, I've also kind of saved myself through creativity, even when I was very traumatized. But we want to look at, like, creativity will naturally flow when you're in touch with your true self. It's just the most natural thing in existence, And I'm going to actually add on a couple quotes from Osho that relate to what I said about creative being a channel for the divine, because some people will be like, what is she talking about? And he said, and he had a whole book on creativity, which I read a while ago, and I was reading again for this podcast. But he says, you become more divine as you become more creative. All the religions of the world have said that God is the creator. I don't know whether he is the creator or not, but one thing I know, the more creative you become, the more godly you become. When your creativity comes to a climax, when your whole life becomes creative, you live in God. So he must be the creator, because people who have been creative have been closest to him. Love what you do. Be meditative while you're doing it, whatever it is. And he really talks about how creativity is the greatest rebellion in existence. That's another quote he has about it. But because
awesome.
it is rebellious. It
Yes.
is like the moment that you create something new that you haven't seen in this world, you are rebelling against the current existing structures of reality. I can give you actually a direct example on how I personally did this. So, so everyone can kind of see that the internet is shifting into Reels, TikTok culture. Personally, I'm not a fan of TikTok because I personally believe that the CCP party I don't even believe I've seen evidence that the CCP party uses it to spread propaganda. Besides the point, these 60, 90-second reels are obviously where people are being drawn to. So I had to start creating them, even though I'm mainly a writer. And all of the marketers out there are being like, point to things, dance, like it's all super cheesy. I don't want to be like filming,
a formula, right?
I don't want to filming selfies to me pointing into into space because it just feels really stupid for me. It doesn't feel right. So I had to basically be like, okay, this is the medium I'm working with. I have 60 to 90 seconds. I can put audio, I can put voiceover, I can put music. And I just invented something. I was like, I'm just going to take my writing and take nature shots because I have a lot of both. We go hiking every day. And I'm just going to combine them together. And that's all I did. So I just used my own thinking to create something. I'm sure other people have had similar ideas, but regardless, I wasn't copying. So the moment you're copying and you're trying to emulate, you're working in Saturn reality. You're working in like what already exists, what's already been done, what's tried and true. And I'm not saying there isn't a time and place for that, but you need your originality to come through. You need your true essence. There's something about you that makes you uniquely you, which is actually the biggest wellspring for your creativity. So the more that you're yourself, the more creative you become.
Well said. Well, that whole topic of imitation, plagiarism, copying, especially on social media, is a topic on its own. But speaking of imitation, right? Let's look at the bigger picture and how evil works. The dark side is actually very much like, since we just talked about the creative principle, is connected to the divine will, our true self, the light, right? That's where all the creativity springs from. Evil is not capable of creating anything new. And there's even a really famous quote by J.R.R. Tolkien, obviously from Lord of the Rings, saying, evil is not capable of creating anything new. It can only distort and destroy what has been invented or made by the forces of good. So that's very important to understand. And I've mentioned this in my writings and maybe in other podcasts before. The way these matrix forces, the dark side evil works, right? They hijack us through mind control. They need also adhere to the universal law of free will. They need the consent, quote unquote, of the masses that they go along with their agenda. So that's why the propaganda, the lies, the Hegelian dialect of problem, reaction, solution, brainwashing, all gone over for hundreds and thousands of years, media, propaganda, to make people believe that there's a pandemic and that there's even climate change and all of this, to go along with an agenda that actually works against them, their best interest, against the people's best interest. But the way evil works is they use our creativity, our connection to within ourselves to manifest their reality through us. They want to create their reality through us. We're becoming their vessels for them, so to speak. If we don't tap in our own potential of creative exploration and manifestation within ourselves and connect to our true selves and reject the authoritarian way of living and getting out of consensus state. Many people in the consensus state of the masses, their beliefs and thoughts are not their own. They literally help the matrix to create the reality that is intended to enslave humanity.
Yeah, and the biggest way that we waste our creative energy is we just waste time and energy on things that we become consumers instead of creators. Like we all live in this hyper consumption culture. And I'm not saying that there's a time and place for that. I also consume a lot of information. There's a lot of people. It's amazing. Like we have access to pretty much everyone's creative work online at the click of a button, but you got to watch out as well as like when you're watching media or even on social media, and you just get drained from it, like that's usually a sign that it's taking away your creative energy, whatever it is. And it doesn't even mean it necessarily evil or bad, but that's the number one way that we get our creative energy stolen from us. And then there's also the whole sex industry and porn and
sexual energy.
Sexual energy and creativity are inherently, they're the same thing, basically, they're the same energetic principle within ourselves. So the more that we're also, another big way that I know that a lot of people lose creative energy is by being addicted to porn as well.
Yeah. So I want to go deeper into that later on, the interrelationship between sexual energy and creative energy.
We're going to do a second hour?
Exactly.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
But I want to just, touch upon or continue what you said about our creative potentials light in the true self, like Divine Will, but Osho said, right? Our connection to God, our divine essence. So the question obviously is, how do we access it? And that's where shadow work comes in. Shadow work is key in this process to really access our creative potential, because the shadow by itself, by definition, is just not negative traits. A shadow by definition is that which is unconscious. And yes, a lot of negative traits we feel ashamed about ourselves and then project externally, which need to uncover, not to act them out or to be aware of them and transmute them. But within the shadow, even Carl Jung said, the majority is also buried our golden shadow, our potential, our creative potential, our talents, all of that. As Joseph Campbell said, the cave.
The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek.
Exactly. And that's why this inner work, diving deep within our own psyche, is so key to uncover your creative potential. And I want to share a quote here also by Carl Jung. He says, "Our greatest treasure is that which is hidden deep within our own subconscious. It is that dark, unused part of ourself that is in fact light that is unconscious of itself." And Joyce C. Hilfer really clarified that quote in her own way, and I want to mention her writing as well. Because with shadow work, we dive deep into the mud, so to speak, into the darkness. But the more we dive deeper, we really access the light. That's the whole point of shadow work, of trauma work, to integrate our lost parts, to remove all of that that's in the way of finding our true self, the true light.
It's about wholeness too. That's
Exactly.
the key point. So we're trying to not, I think especially I've noticed this in the spiritual community, we try and put on this like spiritual self-image.
Yeah.
But actually, if you look at some of the artists, the great poets and artists across the ages, they're not just pretending to be some sort of image. They are able to access the spectrum of human experience, and that's where their brilliance comes from.
Exactly. So here's a quote by Joyce Hilfer.
And she says, "Giving up robs us of drawing gold from our depths. Imagine having a well, a very deep well that is topped off with several feet of tainted water. But deeper down, the water is clear, and down even further it is a spring that bubbles cold and pure through deposits of gold. Should we give up because of what we saw in the beginning, or do we want to tap the depths and clear away the polluted water and get down to the very best part? It is true that we only know 5% of who and what we are. Then is it possible that we should have untapped depths, which is where our being is pure and free of contamination? Shall we give up such a rich experience because of what we have seen on the surface?" Yeah, and what she's basically speaking to is that you have to be okay with anything that comes out of your brain, your mouth, your mind when you're being creative. If you are already criticizing it before it even comes out, then that's also part of maybe your shadow that you need to look at. So, that's the joy of like being an artist, is you don't even know what's going to come out of you sometimes. You just feel that spark. We're going to talk about the daimyon in the second hour a little bit. There's this divine almost spark of inspiration that comes and visits you. And if you're scared, as she said, to kind of go down because of the tainted water, that might be on the surface, like all the thoughts that you don't want to think, all the things that you don't want to express, all the, ideas that you don't want to acknowledge are in your head, that you're not going to get to the wellspring of creativity, I think is what she's pointing at.
Yeah. That's exactly one part. Other part that came to me, and she talks about the tainted water. Also at the beginning, when you really dive deep, do shadow work or trauma work, you will come, or even do meditative work somatically into your body. It's not like, again, this idea like, oh, I'm going to be love and light and bliss and here's my true self. No. You will count a lot of parts you have been suppressed, denied, avoided, not only this lifetime, but many lifetimes, sort of feelings, emotions, or ideas, beliefs about yourselves you do not like. You'd like to avoid. You tend to project externally. You have disowned within yourself. So that's why shadow work is messy. It takes courage because you rather be completely honest. Authenticity, that also implies authenticity, right? Creativity is linked to authenticity.
Oh, for sure.
But true authenticity is also facing yourself, not lying to yourself, and accepting yourself fully with full self-responsibility.
Exactly.
And if you have never done this kind of inner work, shadow work can be extremely difficult and disturbing at the beginning because you will come face to face with parts you have disowned. But again, only project externally. You need to own them back, to integrate the shadow, to become whole. And then she says you go deeper and deeper, and then the light appears. That's where you find your true unified self connected to the divine.
Yeah. And also the shadow work helps you integrate the personal unconscious. So that includes both positive and negative qualities. And the unconscious, your personal unconscious, is what kind of links you into the collective unconscious, but it's also the wellspring of where the imaginative ideas come from. So people who, these kind of like J.K. Rowling, J.R. Tolkien, any really amazing writer or artist or tends to have a link to this collective unconscious when they create, So the more that we're actually walling ourselves off from our own personal unconscious, the parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge and look at are there, that are parts of ourselves, even our thoughts. Like people literally will hide from their own thoughts because they're too disturbing for them to acknowledge, So if you have this, like, if you're in a relationship and like in the back of your head, you're like, oh my God, like this is not the right person for me. I'm miserable. We're not emotionally attuned. But then people will literally wall that off in their psyche. And you'll see it actually. It creates, emotional suppression will either create a depressive state or a high anxiety, high alert, hypervigilant state. So we want to, notice, like, do I feel safe and connected and calm in my body? Because that is kind of the basis of the ground that you're going to create from. If you feel hypervigilant or you feel depressed, the trauma work is really key as well. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what should we go into
What
next?
about, I want to link the link between creativity and inspiration.
Yes.
It's also very important, because in order to create, we need to be inspired.
Yes.
And,
well,
go ahead.
I would also say that you can foster that inspiration on your own, and you're I know that there's some people, including myself, who'd be like, oh, I just don't want to write until I feel like it. I just want to create until I feel like it. Point. But the more that you're in your true self, the more that you can literally turn it on at any moment you want. And maybe your first draft won't be good, but as you practice, it will get better.
That's a good point. It's not just, but let's go into the word itself, inspiration, right? The root word from Latin inspirare, which means to breathe into life. To be infused with spirit, also from Latin spiritus. So the earliest English writings were using inspire to give it the meaning to influence, move, or guide through divine or supernatural agency or power. So it really included in the word already that the inspiration comes from somewhere else. Right. Yeah. And I've always said many times before, again, in my writings, and we've talked about that we are transducers of higher forces. So we are also transducers of divine will, of positive forces, of our higher self, other forces that create through us, that we can draw upon. I'm not talking about occult hostile forces that also use us and actually use our creativity against us. As I mentioned before, that's how evil works. But a lot of it, we are transducers where we tap into something higher. Highly creative people, they also know that what they create is not a quote unquote their own, but they're tapping into something higher, the divine will, something beyond the ego personality. And in a sense, we quote unquote channel that. And in order to tap into that, like Laura said, it's not just waiting for it. We need to also approach it and foster that relationship. Yeah. Exactly. Sometimes we need to engage the will and sit, and it requires discipline as well.
Yeah, exactly. And also, it's like a muscle. The more you practice it, the better you get, actually. It's like any other skill, you want to learn how to play piano, you got to practice. You want to learn how to write, you got to practice. Also, if you want to learn how to write, you need to read as well. You need to, that's one form of consumption, which is great, is that the more that you read, the more expansive your vocabulary becomes, the better writer, the better speaker you become. I notice a distinct difference when I'm not I'm always reading, but in my life, I've taken some breaks from reading and my creativity suffered, to be honest. And that was maybe necessary for the time being, but we want to surround ourselves with influences that also inspire us. Music, art, books, even being in nature, This is how you kind of start to open the flow a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it's really important also what we consume, because again, in this day and age with this we have so much media, so much information, so much, technology that distracts us. It's also important, what do we focus on? What media do we consume as well? Right? There's a lot of trash and stuff you don't really want to get into your conscience.
No.
And it's easily distract into our consciousness.
Yeah.
Yes. Because we can easily distract the lower vital feeds of this and that and gossip and all of kinds of things we indulge in that takes us away from our creative potential, because any piece of art, any creative artist knows that it requires a lot of work and dedication to create something. And what we are talking about, creativity, is not necessarily related to traditional art like painting or making music or writing. That's fine and good, but creating your life, creating a life.
Yes.
Right? To get out of the beliefs, and that also tapping into our creative potential also implies questioning, where do our beliefs come from? Deconditioning. We have a lot of, I see a lot of people self-sabotaging them, unconsciously. If you have not made your shadow conscious, there can be unconscious fear of success because you don't feel not good enough and all of that, and self-sabotage any successful endeavor and whatnot. So it's really important to do this inner work, to embrace or to tap into this creative potential and face all these beliefs. The scarcity program is a big one nowadays, right? If people are definitely being challenged, are struggling in many ways, but within it, there's always a lesson, how in the lesson or the way out is tapping into the creativity and seeing things differently. And it also implies trying things out, stepping into your creative potential, like I've seen in my life with many endeavors I've got myself into, be it even with my body work, with my writings, any creations. You have to be risky, try things out, and you will fail. And
allow yourself to fail. Basically.
Exactly. Sometimes it's not everything is good. Sometimes I write and I judge myself. And like Laura said, it takes time. I mean, I look back by my first writings 15, 20 years ago, and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe, I can be very hard on myself as well, but it takes time to create, and you test it again and again, and you do it over and over.
Yeah, you got to have this kind of like experimentation, curiosity kind of thing. You got to also, you have to leave room to fail a lot. In fact, especially in the beginning, especially if you're just starting out with a creative gift, or maybe you're reigniting it after a long time not paying attention to it, is that it will take time for you to kind of get your legs on this again and just to practice. Most of the time, the first draft of anything I write, very rarely do I publish that unless I'm like, wow, that was I think maybe like one time out of like 25 things I write, I'm like, okay, I did it, But that's only, by the way, the only times that have happened is either when I'm in meditation retreat or I just get out of it, because my mind is so clear that I don't have to edit it down, actually. I'm able to say it in as little as words as possible. But just best know that your first painting, your first photography, your first piece of writing, allow it to be crappy and just forgive yourself for that, because it will be, but you'll get better. You'll get a little bit better every single day, and as long as, and especially if you're doing something that's unique, that's never been done before, there can be a lot of anxiety and fear when you put it out there.
Yeah.
And that, for me, I don't really think that goes away. Like almost every single time I post something on social media, something I wrote, something I made, or whatever, there's a little bit of anxiety behind it.
Yes.
Because you're stepping into the unknown. You're stepping into the discomfort of putting yourself out there. And people will tell you it's crap. They'll project on you. It doesn't happen all the time, by the way, but just be open for that to happen. People will not even take you seriously. You got to be open to that to happen, which actually really leads me into can I talk about the Pluto and Leo archetype a little bit?
One second before we dive into that, you made some really important points, because I still have, when I post something or put my writings or anytime, I still also have this anxiety, because I put myself, it's like especially when I speak of my own experiences, I put myself out in the quote unquote naked to the world.
Yeah.
Right. And like you said, you have always the trolls, the attackers, the haters, so to speak. But I want to touch upon that as well. By the way, I also get my creative insights, ideas when I'm out in nature, just like downloads, inspiration.
Yeah. So basically, you actually have a South Node in Leo. I have a 5th house stellium. So I also acknowledge that creativity tends to come naturally for us. It's a default. But if you don't feel creative, and if everything we're talking about, like, how do I do that? Well, I'm going to give you a tip. And this is from evolutionary astrology. So Pluto and Leo, but the Leo archetype rather is preceded by the Cancer archetype. So the more that we actually have a solid emotional basis, we feel good about ourselves, we have solid self-esteem, the easier our creative self-actualization is. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is, like, as long as you're dependent on like what the outer world thinks of you, and it's getting to the point where you don't even put anything out there because you're afraid of the feedback, then you need to actually focus on developing a solid sense of self, solid self-esteem. Being, that's kind of like what the rare people who have secure attachment and healthy attuned caregivers get. They just go out in the world and they do their thing. And they're like, okay, some people are going to like it, some people aren't, but it doesn't change who I am as a person. And that's the issue. Is like, if you start creating from a really fragile ego, then what happens is you'll either be inflated when people like it or deflated when people don't like it. And it'll give you these intense highs and lows, also narcissism, delusions of grandeur, So if you're having trouble being creative, just being like, okay, but what's my relationship with my early childhood stuff? Have I learned how to be emotionally self-sufficient? Meaning I'm not dependent on constant attention and validation for my creativity. So if you haven't sorted out that early childhood stuff and the self-esteem issues that it can create, then you'll be constantly demanding reassurance, validation. And no amount of external validation will work if you don't have the emotional basis within yourself. So it's kind of like these like tortured artists, like Kurt Cobain's like the first archetype that comes to mind. But he was like, so intensely creative, really created something new, created this whole kind of like, this new kind of music, right? But you can see his sense of self was so fragile that he collapsed under the weight of his creativity. And that can be an issue. And
the attention he got, basically.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's a trap if people then identify with their creation and their sense of self-worth is tied into the quote-unquote products or whatever they do.
Yes, yeah. Right? And that's a big hindrance.
Yeah. So you
got to just let it go. You got to be like, personally, I found the things that I like the most that I've created sometimes don't get the biggest engagement, or like people, very few people will get it, So the barometer is not actually other people's approval. The barometer is like, do I feel like I expressed something that was important to me? Do I like it, And if you're just beating yourself up about every single thing that you write, then it points to these kind of, the needs of the Cancer archetype. You need to actually have this more firm emotional basis by looking at your early childhood, by looking at your self-esteem, by looking at the way you relate to yourself before you creatively self-actualize.
Yes, that's where you tap into your creative potential, by this inner work. Now, it's interesting to note as well, so it's also important not to look at others when you're really creative, not to compare yourself or what others do. That's what ties into the trap of imitation. Not of people just copycats of copycats. They're not really creative. They're following quote unquote formulas, as you just mentioned.
Yes.
On social media and all that. But I want to just talk about your creative potential is also deeply linked to your quote unquote soul purpose, to this one thing that you can do better than anybody else. It's very unique to you. And that's what Joseph Campbell talked about: follow your bliss and the rest will come. Even went that far, follow your bliss and the money will show up, so to speak. I mean, more is needed than that. But what he's hinting at, following your bliss, is this one thing you're really into that excites you. It ties into, I've talked about this before, tap into the joy of the inner child. And joy is also the pure essence and attribute of your soul being that doesn't depend on anybody's attention on you. So following your bliss, you can see your creative potential, even what Laura just shared, and you do something that excites you and you don't care what other people think about it. You almost don't even care about the outcome. There's something by the act of doing it excites you, and you're extremely energetic. So also important to understand that to be creative and inspired, meaning infused with spirit, is to be full of life, energetic, animated. It really once you're really creative and tapped into your bliss of what really excites you, you get a tremendous amount of energy from nature. Your life force gets activated because you're motivated by this creative spirit, creative impulse, so to speak. So that's also kind of guideline. But our bliss is also, covered up. The joy of inner child is covered up because of what Laura just mentioned, our childhood wounding, our programming, our conditioning, trauma, shadow aspects, self-diminishing thoughts, sort of thoughts we have about ourselves are actually parents that maybe shunned us or have put us down when we were creative. And then all of a sudden we feel we're not good enough. When we do this, we don't receive the love. So we're really afraid to shine, to show our creative potential because of how other people may perceive us.
Yeah, especially if you were like very creative as a child, which is a lot of children, by the way. Most children have this inherent like curiosity, creativity to them. But the moment that someone tried to like told you weren't good at doing that, or someone, even these little moments where you were like a kid and you showed your mom something you created and she didn't actually acknowledge it, that can be a block, So we have to look at all these, like all the moments we were told we're not creative, all the moments we were told we were not talented. All of this is stuff that gets suppressed into the shadow that limits our creativity. I know actually I had one experience where I used to be in choir in elementary school as a kid, and I auditioned for this like next level choir, and then I freaked out. I got so anxious in the audition. I like totally bombed it, and they didn't let me into this choir. And then ever since then, I didn't like sing anymore, basically. So it was like, that's the kind of traumas that can happen to the creativity, though, is like one moment that's disheartening, that's not sufficiently supported by the environment, meaning that if I went home to my parents and told them what happened and they were like, oh, but you are really talented, it would have been a repair. But that was enough to kind of like burn out my light in that area.
But I hear you sing sometimes. You have a beautiful voice.
Yeah, I do it now, but I would never do it like professionally. Maybe that's still my block there. But regardless, what I'm trying to say is like, don't underestimate. It's good to take stock of any moments where someone you felt shut down your creative light. They were like, why would you do that? That's stupid. What's the point? Whatever. Told you you're not good at doing that. That's all important to look at, because that actually becomes the basis of you suppressing your creativity later on.
So I like to tie this into something else. Also very important to be very honest with yourself. And I can also put the mirror on myself. At times, also the more you're removed from your own creativity, from your own inner spirit, the less you're inspired, the less you're connected to your bliss, the more you tend to criticize others, the more you tend to talk shit about others, the more you're stuck in negativity and complain about this and that, life sucks, blame, all of that. Yeah. That's really a big sign. Right, there's a lot of people, like especially nowadays, trolls. The people, they're just professional. They just talk shit. They just troll, criticize everyone, but they never put anything worthwhile out themselves.
Yeah.
Right? They're just the anonymous people who just want to talk shit. It's their own unacknowledged pain, their own frustration. And I can own this myself. Many years ago, 15 years ago, I remember, or longer than that, 17 years ago, I was working as a body worker massage therapist at this retreat center. Was a great job. I love my work. But there was this other guy working there as well, also a massage therapist, but also was a yoga teacher. He was hosting yoga retreats, and he was really successful. He made good money, and really in his element. He hosted retreats in Peru, all of that back in the days, yoga retreats. And he would trigger me. I would just talk shit about him because I thought he's just slimy. He's just like, say he's charging way too much, and all these things, all my projections to make myself feel better. Right. But what I realized in my own inner process in applying shadow work, because I was clearly projecting on him, he was triggering me, was as I dove deep within myself, that I was actually projecting onto him and criticizing him, talking shit about him because I was envious about him. Yeah. And I was not as quote unquote creative or successful, hasn't fully realized myself on that level. I was diminishing myself. And instead of exploring this myself, instead of getting seen as a motivation, inspiration, I turned it against him, talked and started just putting him down, even gossip about him behind his back to other therapists and all that, to make myself feel better. Yeah. Right. In that sense. So that's very important to acknowledge and look into your own life where you constantly complain, criticize, this is not good enough, this is this and that, and where it's really stemming from.
Yeah, and if you are unhappy with something in the world, it's like Jordan Peterson says, that's your problem. Like, go fix it.
Yeah, clean up, before you talk about others, clean up your own room, so to speak.
Exactly.
Metaphorically speaking,
but it
right?
bothers you for a reason. So, for example, I was not into this whole cheesy TikTok dancing, pointing thing. I was like, I'm not going to do that. That would be unnatural. But it irked me. And then I'm like, no, I'm going to do it like this, and I was like happy with the result. But that's what I mean is there something in the external world, something people are creating that bothers you? Well, that's your problem. What are you going to do about it? Are you just going to leave comments online and some people hate follow people just so that they can hate on them? It's so toxic to you. Creativity stems from your joy. So the moment I'm in a joyful, happy mood is a moment that the flow totally opens up for me. And I just start getting tons of ideas. Like it literally comes, you have to feel safe, secure, calm, connected to yourself, and joyful. And then that's the ingredient.
Yeah. On that note, I want to give you guys a challenge, something practical. So for anyone listening to this, go for 1 week. That's already a lot. Maybe just for one day, but go for 1 week without complaining about anything, without criticizing anything, without any negativity. I'm not saying this as a new age bypass but the purpose of this exercise is really to observe yourself, how your mind may still get irritated by trivial stuff, always wants to complain, negativity, even justify your limitations of why you can't do certain things. And observe not only verbally, but also your thoughts, who are drawn to complaining, negativity, criticizing all along, and observe yourself truly. Where is it truly coming from? Because most often, if you're not self-aware, if you're not engaged in inner work, we project it externally. We blame others and we give the cause to others for our negativity and why we criticize and all of that, instead of realizing that it comes from our own unconscious shadow projection. So go for a week without complaining and see the effect it has on you, or how your mind really works. It's really an exercise of self-observation.
Yeah. And I'm just going to give some reflection questions as well to kind of close it off. So, what is your relationship to your creative impulse? Do you ever feel a creative impulse? What is it like in your body? What does it feel like? Creative impulse is a feeling toned emotional state. So to me, it has a certain feeling nature. It would be different for me than different for you, but I feel this openness, this curiosity, this playfulness, this joyfulness. That's the essence of it. And do you have a conscious relationship with that spark? What happens when you have that spark? Do you not have that spark at all? Which points to maybe needing to look at the trauma piece, looking at early childhood wounds where you didn't feel safe to be yourself. So what do you do when that happens? And then also some practical exercise I'm going to offer as well is that I've been doing, it's funny because I used to do this myself without even reading about it, but there's a really famous book called The Artist Way, and she talks about morning pages in it. Super famous practice. It's basically writing every morning, first thing in the morning, without compromise, 3 pages stream of consciousness. So the pages can be, she doesn't really distinguish how many, like what kind of pages, computer pages or notebook pages. So it can be written, it could be typed, doesn't matter, but it has to be stream of consciousness, meaning if you're thinking about your to-do list, if you're complaining, actually, this is okay to complain in this exercise. If you're just stressed out about what happened yesterday or stressed out about, some chore you have to do, get it all out because this is in the way of your creativity. So 3 pages every morning and just get out whatever is going on, and you will be shocked at how much it will open the flow. It may not happen right away, but personally for me, it was pretty quickly, about like 5 days into doing the practice. I'm already a creative person, so maybe it was a bit easier for me, but about 5 days into doing the practice, I had a better vocabulary. I was able to think and speak more clearly. I was able to formulate new ideas in a different way. So I could totally notice it's working because I got all the junk out of my brain. So, the more parts of your kind of subconscious or pre-conscious that you're walling off, the more you're walling off from your creativity. So you have to be willing to go there. You have to, if you're upset at someone and you don't want to acknowledge it to yourself, it's going to come out onto that page, all of the stuff that you're avoiding looking at will often come out. So just let it flow and then see what happens and then see what arises out of that. And she really talks about how, some of her best ideas came during these morning pages. And I'm even noticing that myself, actually. Even the other day I was doing it And then all of a sudden I was just getting creative ideas in the middle of writing it on like the side note I had to get down on a separate document because I wanted to publish it. So like, don't underestimate this, but you have to get into the practice of doing it. So it's called Morning Pages. You can either get her book or you can just listen to what I'm telling you. It's 3 pages, stream of consciousness every morning, and see what comes out, especially if you feel the call to really add something of value to this world. Like, we're not going to get out of this unless we think of a new option and we actually present ourselves as a solution to what's going on in the world.
Exactly. Well said. And then concludes the first hour. So just to recap a little bit, I hope you guys see now really how important it is to activate our creative potential and why it is needed now more than ever to counteract the hostile evil agenda who are only imitating. They cannot create. They use our creativity in their favor. So if we go along with them, we're just submissive, we just consume and stay unconscious. We just play along with them. We create their desired reality through us. So we need to counteract and activate our creativity. It takes effort, takes work, inner work. It's directly linked to shadow work, right? To dive deep, it includes risks, being courageous, embracing failure sometimes, trying things out, stepping out of our comfort zone, and all of that. Very, very important. In the second hour, we're going to dive deeper as well into the interrelationship between sexual energy and creative energy. That's this whole topic in itself. And also the interrelationship between creativity and abundance and opulence and how this works together. And the whole misconceptions about spirituality and abundance and all that and nature. So again, we want to dive deeper into all of that. What else? Yes.
So another thing I'm going to cover too, I'm going to talk about this concept as a daimon, not to be confused with demon, which is a huge aspect of your creative spark. And then another thing as well, I do actually have a quote from Osho regarding basically about how conforming, the mob psychology makes you uncreative. So I have a really good quote about that. Perfect. Because that's kind of what's going on right now is like, as long as the mob psychology is ruling your psyche, especially this woke stuff, where it's like, you can't say this, you have to say it in this way, that will be the thief of your creativity. So we're going to talk about what he says about that.
Exactly. From a bigger picture perspective, it's evil forces where Tico that is trying to enslave humanity, is trying to kill the spirit, is trying to kill our creative spirit, really. To numb it down also ties into the vax and all of that. I've written a whole article about that, the metaphysical effects on the vax, or even pharmaceutical drugs and all of that. They kill our creative spirit. So, and also if you want to dive deeper into this work to really unlock your creative potential and go on a journey with Laura and myself for 12 weeks, we have still spots left. Our 12-week in-depth coaching program starts July 25th. Until October 15th, and you can learn more about it and apply at thattimeoftransition.com. And again, if you want access to the second hour of the podcast and you're not a member yet, you can sign up to the membership at my website, veilofreality.com. And with that being said, see you all in the second hour.